the whispering bunker. The wind shrieked over the French landscape, bringing with it the cold, bitter bite of November 1944. Private Keller clutched his rifle, his knuckles white against the cracked leather of his gloves. His platoon, a motley band of American soldiers, plowed through mud toward a sloping hill. They were there for a simple mission: seize an abandoned German bunker said to contain important documents. The war was slowly coming to an end, but danger still hung thick around them. Keller looked toward his buddy, Corporal Daniel Reese, his easy smile gone for days. Something about this mission didn't sit right. The entrance yawned before them, a ragged maw of concrete half submerged in the dirt. Vines wrapped around its edges, as if nature wished to close it. Captain Hargrove, a hard man with eyes that were chipped flint, held up a hand to stop the platoon. He indicated Keller, Reese, and 3 others, Sergeant Malone, Private Ortiz, and Private Weber, to lead. The rest would man the perimeter. Keller's stomach turned, yet he nodded, moving with Reese toward the dark mouth. The air within was stagnant, with a smell of wet rock and something metallic. Flashlights illuminated a downward-sloping, narrow corridor. The smooth, nearly polished walls were unlike Keller's previous experience with bunkers. Unusual carvings dissected the concrete, spiral patterns and jagged symbols that appeared to change with every flicker of the lights. Ortiz said a quiet prayer, his voice overshadowed by water's insistent dripping somewhere deep inside. As they made their way down, all grew quiet. Boots rang out, but the sound died too suddenly, absorbed by the bunker's depths. Keller's flashlight illuminated a dusty helmet on the ground, rusty straps reduced to threads. Next to it, a solitary bullet casing glinted, a lost coin. Reese kicked at it with his boot, and a faint clinking echoed, abnormally loud. All stopped. Keller's ears caught a brief, indistinguishable murmur, a low, wordless sound that appeared to emanate from the walls. The grizzled veteran, Sergeant Malone, scoffed. This, he said, was merely the wind. Keller saw, however, the man's hand shaking against his rifle. They moved forward, the corridor spilling into a series of tunnels. Hargrove's map, drawn from briefings, did them no good here. The bunker sprawled wider than anticipated, its plan unlogically organized. Chambers opened into dead ends, others curling back on themselves without explanation. In a particular room, a table had been overturned, covered in the identical cryptic symbols scrawled on all walls. Pages scattered on the floor, all the ink running into unreadable smudges. The longer they descended, the colder it grew. Keller's breath fogged in his face, though the air clung, almost so thick it would choke. Weber, youngest among them, kept looking over his back, his eyes open wide. He said he heard footfalls, distant, deliberate, following behind them. Malone told him to stop, but Keller couldn't rid himself of an overwhelming sense of being watched. The whispers came again, louder, wending through silence like wisps of smoke. They weren't a language, really, not exactly, just a cadence, rhythmic and insistent, a chant from an unknown tongue. Reese braked sharply, his light fixed on a door before him. This door, unlike all the others, was of steel, without any marks of rust upon it. A single emblem covered its center, a spiral, bigger and more elaborate than the rest, with lines that appeared almost to throb in the light. Keller's heart thumped. He wished he could go back, alert the others, but Malone elbowed him aside, grasping for the handle. The door groaned open, and a large chamber beyond lay visible. The air became colder yet, and the whispers surged, making Keller's head full of a fear he could not define. Inside, the room was vacant except for a pedestal at the room's center, upon which a single artifact sat, a glossy, black sphere, no bigger than a baseball, reflecting their flashlights into twisted shards. The whispers appeared to originate from it, intensifying, growing urgent. Ortiz stepped backward, grasping his cross necklace. Weber whimpered, his flashlight trembling. Even Malone retreated, his bravado failed. Reese extended his hand, reaching for the sphere, yet Keller caught him by his arm, holding him back. Something was amiss, horribly amiss. The whispers ceased. For an instant, silence reigned, thick and unrelenting. Then, out of the shadows beyond the pedestal, there arose a sound, a rumbling, guttural hum, a vibration of some unseen machinery. The floor vibrated slightly, and Keller's flashlight wavered. The air became taut, as if the bunker itself were constricting. They needed to go. Now. But when they turned toward the door, it slammed back shut with an ear-shattering clang, enclosing them within the room with whatever waited in the shadows. The echo of the steel door remained, a taunting memory of their situation. Private Keller pounded against it, his fists futile against cold metal. The air in the chamber was cold, every breath a biting sting against his lungs. Corporal Reese stood immobile, his gaze fixed on the black sphere perched atop the stony pedestal. Its face appeared to absorb, reflect nothing now. The vibration of shadows filled with a growing hum, a deep thrum vibrating in Keller's bones. Sergeant Malone growled curses beneath his breath, his tones strangled with fear he would not confess. Private Ortiz held his cross, mouthing prayers, and Private Weber hugged the wall, his flashlight sweeping wildly. Keller surveyed the room. Walls were smooth, etched with the identical coiled symbols that had lined the hallways, yet these appeared darker, alive in the dim light. They were alone, no other door, no vents, no cracks, just the door, sealed now. The vibration grew stronger, and with it the whispers, a vague murmur at first, seeping back into their minds. They were clearer now, a dispute heard by no ears, a language no human could decipher. Keller's head rang, the sound creeping into his brain, compelling him toward the orb. Reese stepped toward the pedestal slowly, his movements slow, as if being pulled by a thread. Keller shook his shoulders. Reese opened his eyes glassy. He mumbled something about hearing his name. Malone snapped at them to concentrate, his voice breaking. He instructed Ortiz and Weber to check the walls for a mechanism, something that would open the door. Ortiz crawled his hands up and down the concrete, but Weber remained fixed, his face white. The whispers were telling him to remain still. Listen, he said. Malone clamped his hands onto Weber's collar, yelling for him to wake up, but the young private shook only. Keller's flashlight started flickering again, its beam growing dim. He clapped it against his hand, but it grew darker. The others' flashlights did likewise, their beams dwindling to faint glows. The hum became a deafening roar, the floor trembling underfoot. The orb started radiating, a faint, greenish light that throbbed with the hum. The whispers echoed with it, a chorus now, simmering and unstoppable. Keller felt a pull in his chest, a need to reach out and touch the orb, comprehend it. Ortiz shouted, pointing to the wall behind the pedestal. The symbols there were moving, not just appearing to shift in the light, but actually crawling, their lines twisting like snakes. The sight sent a chill through Keller. He'd seen war's horrors, bodies torn by shrapnel, villages reduced to ash, but this was different. This was wrong, unnatural, as if the bunker itself were alive. Malone, his face ashen, ordered them to stay back, but his authority was slipping. The chamber felt smaller, the walls closer, though Keller knew they hadn't moved. Weber screamed, his flashlight flying from his hand. He clawed at his ears, muttering about the voices, telling him they knew him, knew his fears. Someone held him before he could move toward the orb, his hands reaching out. Keller tackled him, holding him down. Weber struggled, unnatural strength, his eyes unseeing, his face wild. Ortiz and Reese were able to help hold him, but Weber's screams only ended. He spoke with a voice that didn't belong to him, guttural, rapid, spitting out words none of them knew. The glow of the orb increased, and its light cast shadows that made shapes on the walls that weren't their own. The door creaked behind them, a low metallic scrape. Keller turned, hope rising, but the door didn't open. The sound returned, however, coming not from the door now, but from the walls, a scraping against concrete, a circling. The whine grew frenetic, and the orb's light burst, momentarily blinding them. When vision returned, Weber lay still, body slack. His eyes fixed on the ceiling, his face peaceful, a faint curve playing on his lips, his eyes radiating a look of peace, and something else. The whispers cut off with a suddenness that pushed against Keller's ears. The glow of the orb died, but the hum remained, now softer, a heartbeat. Malone, his face wet with sweat, instructed them to push on the door again. Keller and Reese heaved together, straining at the shoulders, but it would not open. Then, out of the shadows beyond the pedestal, a slow, unhesitating footstep, a great heaviness, became audible. Something was present with them, and it was coming nearer. The footstep reverberated within the sealed room, a slow, deliberate thud that stifled Private Thomas Keller's thoughts. His flashlight, a dim glow, barely lit the pedestal upon which sat the black orb, now once again a dull, unreflective surface. The vibration thrummed through the floor, a steady thrum of a far-off engine, yet the whispers again had died away. Corporal Daniel Reese flanks Keller, his rifle held aloft, yet his hands tremble. Sergeant Malone kneels beside Private Weber's lifeless body, checking for a pulse. Private Ortiz huddles atop a wall, his cross clasped within his shaking fingers. The air is clogged, oppressive, as if the bunker is holding its breath. Another step echoed, nearer now, from beyond the shadows of the pedestal. Keller's heart thumped. The chamber, which must be empty, or at least so it should be, had yielded no hiding spot, no alcove. The steps went on, slow and deliberate, moving around them. Malone rose, his face set with grit and fear, and shouted for them to line up for defense. Keller stepped into line, alongside Reese, rifles held into the blackness. Ortiz paused, then fell into line with them, his prayers a soft murmur. Weber, however, stayed on the floor, immobile, his macabre grin fixed. The footsteps halted. Silence clamped down on the chamber, interrupted only by the hum. Keller strained his gaze, peering into the shadows. His flash lamp flickered, revealing fleeting visions of the spiraling symbols on the walls. They pulsed, their lines twitching like veins. Then, a fresh sound, a low, wet rasp, air being pulled through a blocked pipe. Coming from the pedestal's direction, but the orb remained still, absorbing whatever faint light there was. Reese told him he saw something move, a flick of movement too rapid to follow. Keller didn't see it, but his neck hairs were bristling. Malone instructed them to hold station, his voice raw. He approached the pedestal, his light struggling, and examined the orb. He didn't touch it, yet his close presence appeared to agitate the air. The rasp became more intense, and a distant tapping sound, similar to bony fingers on rock, joined it. Ortiz gripped his cross harder, his pleas disappearing. Keller wanted to flee, scramble against the door, but there was no exit. The room was a crypt, and they were sealed with whatever occupied it. There was a shadow, not an illusion of light, but a definite shape, vertical and jagged, moving slowly along the wall. Keller didn't see it clearly, but Reese gasped, stating that it had eyes, white and unflickering. Malone turned, his rifle scything through the shadows, but he saw nothing. The tapping grew more urgent, now coming from all angles, as if from living walls. The humming grew, and the orb glowed with a dim greenish light, casting twisted shadows that elongated and distorted, making shapes that bore no resemblance to any human form. Weber stirred. His body jerked, and a low moan slipped past his lips. Malone knelt beside him, but before he could say a word, Weber's eyes flew open. They were unfocused, hazy, like smoked glass, reflecting nothing. He jerked into an upright sitting position, his movements erratic, and spat a stream of incomprehensible words. The rasp of his voice echoed his rhythm, as if something spoke through him. Ortiz yelled, retreating, while Keller and Reese held out rifles, unsure what to do. Malone grasped Weber's shoulders, shaking, but the private's head dropped, his grin expanding. The footsteps returned, faster now, a tighter circle. The shadow reappeared, more distinct now, gigantic, with edges smudged, forms shifting, as if it were a puff of smoke. It stopped beside the pedestal, and Keller could have sworn he saw eyes inside it, softly aglow, staring at him. The orb's radiance grew, and the runes on walls pulsed, their movements sending him spinning. Air thickened, pinching Keller's chest, making every inhalation a labor. The rasp deepened into a growl, low and foreboding, and the tapping became a steady thudding, a heartbeat ringing out through the bunker. Weber rose, his movements jerky, and gestured toward the orb. His voice grew, his tone hard and demanding, yet still senseless. The shadow crept closer, a pressure on Keller's brain, compelling him to kneel, to succumb. He fought, his grip on his rifle tightening, but Ortiz fell to his knees, crying. Reese yelled at Malone to do something, but the sergeant was paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the shadow. The door creaked once more, a strangled sound, but it didn't open. The pounding became thunder, and Keller realized with a sense of horror that it wasn't coming from within the walls. Its source was within his brain. The thudding within Private Thomas Keller's head rivaled the vibration rumbling through the bunker's chamber. The black orb pulsed brighter, its greenish hue vibrating with the beat. The shadow moved close by the pedestal, shifting shape, towering 1 second, hunching over the next, its edges curling back on themselves like wisps of smoke. Its eyes, white and unflinching, stared into Keller, reawakening a feral fear that made him immobile. Corporal Daniel Reese clutched his rifle, his breathing shallow, while Sergeant Malone remained frozen, his eyes fixed upon Private Weber. Weber, no longer his own, staggered before the orb, his unfocused eyes reflecting back at him, his guttural incantations filling his lungs. Private Ortiz kneeled, his prayer muffled by the growing growl coming from within shadows. The metal door was sealed, its face taunting them with imprisonment. The swirling patterns on the walls accelerated, their movements spinning Keller's head. The air clung, every draw a struggle. The shadow touched his mind, pushing him toward the orb, toward putting forth his hand. He fought, but the urge hardened, a hand driving his thoughts. Reese said he felt it, too, his voice trembling. Malone, rock hard, appeared lost, his rifle loose at his side. Weber's chanting ended. He wheeled, his expression a ghastly grin, and gestured toward Keller. The shadow shifted, its gaze tracking Weber's gesture. Keller's heart thudding, his legs trembling. The orb's light burst forth, and the buzzing grew into a scream, vibrating through the floor. The symbols on the walls appeared to burst free, floating above them as faint, ethereal curves that coiled into shapes that Keller couldn't identify, faces, hands, things he could not define. Ortiz wailed, holding his cross, while Reese bellowed at Weber to cease, his voice nearly drowned by the chaos. Malone shook himself awake, grabbing at Weber's arm. The private didn't struggle, his body awkward, too rigid, too weighted. Malone pulled him back, but Weber's feet remained stuck, anchored to the pedestal. The shadow growled, a rumble that shook Keller's teeth, and burst forward, covering Weber for an instant. Malone jerked back, letting him go, his face gone white. Weber's grin expanded, and he continued his incantation, now a shout, his speech sharp and searing. The orb flared, growing brighter, sending shadows creeping over the room like phantoms. There was a pull, not only in his head, but in his body, a pull towards the orb. His feet were moving involuntarily, a step, and then a second. Reese wrapped his arm around him, holding him firm, but it took a toll on them both. The eyes of the shadow never wavered from Keller, a weighty look suffocating his will. Keller envisioned things in his head, scenes of endless tunnels, of soldiers such as him, confined and crying, their faces merging into the walls of the bunker. The visions weren't his, yet he could sense them, a feeling that the bunker itself was recalling its memories. Ortiz screamed, leaping to his feet. He charged toward the door, slamming his fists against it, bloodying his fists on metal. The shadow turned, its shape reaching out toward him. Ortiz stopped dead, his screams strangling, and fell, his body convulsing. The orb's glow wavered, then roared back, as if it were nourished by his terror. Weber's chant became urgent, and the symbols surrounding the pedestal clenched tighter, creating a sphere of light. Keller understood with a sense of horror that the bunker was more than a room. It lived, and the orb was its heart. Malone bellowed, charging toward the pedestal. Swinging his rifle like a club, he swung at the orb, but the shadow caught him, coalescing into a solid shape for an instant. Malone crashed back against the wall, his rifle clattering out of his grip. The shadow towered above him, a deafening growl, yet it didn't strike. It shifted back toward Keller, eyes holding a command. Weber gestured again, his hiss a command, and Keller's body jerked with renewed pull. Reese tackled him, holding him against the floor. The shadow let out a scream that ripped through Keller's brain, and the light of the orb blinded them. Keller's eyes were open again when he saw that Weber had edged nearer to the orb, with his hands over it. The patterns coiled, the vibration peaked, and the shadow enveloped Weber, his form disappearing into him. Weber's eyes turned green, and he grasped for the orb, his fingertips gliding over its skin. The room lurched and juddered, and a crack appeared in the pedestal, a gunshot sound. Keller knew, with a feeling of nauseating certainty, that whatever Weber had just done, it had unleashed something 1,000 times worse. The crack within the pedestal boomed out like thunder, chilling Private Thomas Keller's blood. The green glow pulsed strongly from the black orb, and an unearthly radiance filled the room. Private Weber approached it, his hands still on the orb, his body shaking with an electrical-like charge. The shadow had vanished, being absorbed into him, and his eyes glowed with an identical sickly color to the orb. The swirling symbols in the air fell inward, fusing with the orb, which now vibrated with a fury that started shaking the walls. Sergeant Malone pushed Keller and Daniel Reese away, getting them to their feet, while Malone himself winced on the floor, holding his ribs. Private Ortiz remained still, his body slumped against the door, his cross glinting dimly. The steel door creaked, a wrenching screech, without opening. The chamber vibrated with a life of its own, walls thudding with the beat of the orb's light. Keller's head pounded, the vibration burrowing into his skull, with shards of those visions from beyond. The soldiers pinned, screams carved into the bunker's stone, souls ensnared by its control. He shook them loose, his eyes on Weber. The private's recitation had ended, a low, guttural, non-human laughter replacing it. His body contorted, his limbs bending into unnatural shapes, with something else driving him. Reese yelled for Keller to fire, but Keller didn't, his rifle cumbersome in his hands. Weber was among them, or had been. The orb's light burst wider, and Weber's laughter boomed into screams, echoing through the room. The floor cracked open, fractures radiating out from the pedestal, and the hum rose into a scream, piercing and high. Malone lurched up from his sprawled position, blood oozing from his temple, and seized his rifle. He took a bead on Weber, his voice raspy as he shouted for him to move back. Weber made no move, his eyes aflame with an inner radiance, his fingers deepening into the orb's surface, as if becoming a part of it. The air thickened, cold exchanging places with stifling heat, a warm, wet breath of some giant animal. The walls shook, dust coming down from above, and the symbols etched into concrete pulsed, their curves writhing, like flames. Keller sensed the will of the bunker, an evil presence that desired them, required them. The orb was its heart, and Weber its receptacle. Ortiz stirred, groaning, and crawled toward the door, his hands feeling for his cross. The shadow returned, not a form, but an advancing darkness from Weber, pooling by the pedestal, its boundary creeping up to their boots. Malone discharged. The bullet rang out, hitting Weber in the shoulder, yet he didn't even wince. The orb soaked up the bullet's impact, its radiance engulfing the sound. Weber spun, his head twisted at an unnatural angle, and grinned, a broad, hollow smile revealing too many teeth. Darkness burst forth, clasping Malone, and he screamed as it dragged him towards the pedestal. Keller and Reese grabbed his arms, but it was too powerful. Malone's screams grew silent as the darkness engulfed him, leaving silence behind. Keller stepped back, hauling Reese with him. The door creaked once more, and with a crack, a sliver of faint light seeped through. Ortiz scrambled up, crying out for them to move. Keller didn't move, his gaze fixed on Weber, now suspended above the floor, with light pouring out of his mouth, his eyes, his incisions. The bunker lurched, fissures broadening, and the shadows grew, reaching out for them. Keller felt it, cold and ravenous, threatening him with all of eternity if he didn't move. Reese pushed him toward the exit, shattering whatever spell held him. They went running, pulling along Ortiz, flashlights useless. The tunnels wove, the bunker shifting, but a trail of light from the door led them. Behind, Weber's laughter pursued, mixed with the scream of the orb, echoing back down the labyrinth. They burst out into open air, huddled in mud, a gaping wound of a door behind them. The platoon outside regarded them, rifles at attention, but Keller couldn't talk, couldn't explain. The ground shook, and a last scream burst forth from the bunker, and then silence. The entrance imploded, closing itself, vines curling back tighter, as if appropriating it. Keller turned his gaze upon Reese and Ortiz, their faces haunted. They'd escaped, yet the whispers echoed within his brain, quiet yet insistent, vowing to find him once more. The bunker was entombed, yet its heart pulsed, waiting for the next to take. And Keller knew, with a terror that would never abate, that it had branded him for its own. The toy that watched. The dusty, forgotten odor filled the air of the antique shop, filled with stacks of cracked leather books, tarnished silver, and porcelain dolls. 10-year-old Ethan followed his mother, Clara, through aisles of shadow, only illuminated by flickering lights overhead, against which jagged patterns were cast. Ethan's sneakers screeched against warping wooden boards with every step, and he couldn't explain why he felt eyes upon him, but he knew he did. Clara stopped before a dusty case toward the back, her fingertips running over a tiny wooden box. Only a bit bigger than a loaf of bread, it had been carved with patterns that twisted beneath hazy light. Within, resting on worn velvet, lay a toy, a wooden figure no longer than a ruler. It was a boy, or appeared so, with painted-on black eyes, a stiff red grin, and joints on his limbs like a marionette's. His outfit was a tiny suit, worn thin, yet strangely clean, as if untouched. "Examine it, Ethan," Clara said, her tone warm with a sense of unease. "It is a rare find, is it not? Perfect for your collection?" There were peculiar things he collected: old coins, fossilized shells, a non-functional brass compass. But there was something about this toy that was different. Its black eyes weren't reflecting, though, but something else, something darker, a deep well into which light disappeared. He wanted to say no, he wanted to pull his mom back, because her optimistic smile, so rare since his dad had gone last year, made him unable to do so. The boy nodded, with a forced smile. The shopkeeper, with her twisted branch-like fingers, wrapped the box with brown paper. Her gaze stayed on Ethan, her mouth curling into a smile that didn't find its way onto her face. "Keep it close," she said softly, her voice dry and crisp, like dead leaves. "It likes being close to its owner." In his bedroom at home, Ethan put the box on his shelf beside his other treasures. The house was still, except for the hum of the fridge and every now and again a creak of shifting wood. Clara was cooking dinner in the kitchen, and Ethan attempted to concentrate on his homework. However, his eyes kept wandering over to the box. Brown paper appeared to throb, as if something within were alive. That evening, he had a nightmare about the doll. In his dream, it sat by his bedside, its wooden body twitching as it crept forward. Its colorfully painted smile grew larger, splitting its face with a crooked grin. Ethan attempted a scream, his voice now gone, and the doll's dark eyes engulfed him. Suddenly he awoke, his sheets dripping with sweat. The box remained upon his shelf, yet paper had been clawed open, as if torn from inside. The next morning, Ethan discovered the doll standing on his desk. He hadn't picked it up, hadn't even opened the package. Its head tilted slightly, looking at him. Clara must have put it there, he convinced himself, although she insisted she hadn't when he questioned her. She giggled, musing his hair, but her eyes flashed with something akin to fear. The dolls started popping up in unusual locations over the next few days. On the countertop. In his backpack. Once, he discovered it by sitting on the sink, with a wet-looking red smile. Every time, Ethan put it back in the box, securing it with a rubber band, only for it to slip away again. He attempted to explain it to Clara. However, she had her hands full with her new work. "You're making it up," she said, her tone pinched. "It's only a doll." But Ethan knew it wasn't. In the evenings, he would hear noises, soft knockings, wooden footsteps on the floor. Occasionally, he would catch a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye, a fleeting glimpse of a tiny figure disappearing out of range. He stopped sleeping, his eyes dark-circled. The toy was watching him, waiting for something. He didn't know what, but the mere possibility filled his chest with ice. On the fifth evening, Ethan decided to face it. He sat cross-legged on his bed, with the toy before him. Its unblinking, black eyes regarded him. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice shaking. The room was silent, yet air became dense, pressing against his skin. Then, slowly, the head of the toy turned. Not by a great deal, only an inch, but by enough that Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Its wider smile, and wooden fingers, wiggling with an eagerness to stir. He screamed, thrusting the toy into the box and sending it flying underneath his bed. His eyes refused to shut either that night or the following. The toy remained there, he knew, in the shadows. And it no longer merely watched. Ethan's room became a cell. The presence of the toy clung to him like a stain, poisoning every corner of the house. He stayed away from his bedroom as often as he could, lingering for hours together in the living room or by his parents' backyard, but the sense of being watched trailed him. His mother saw his white face and shaking hands and dismissed it as school pressure or insomnia. She did not see the toy's black eyes everywhere, did not hear the soft taps that rang through the house at night. Ethan attempted to demolish the toy. He brought it into the garage, where his father's dusty tools still were suspended from a pegboard. With a hammer, he slammed it against the wooden figure, anticipating that it would splinter. However, the hammer rebounded, leaving only a faint scrape on the chest of the toy. Its red smile appeared to mock him, and its eyes, those bottomless black holes, appeared to become even darker. He attempted to incinerate it next, holding a lighter close against its arm, but there was only a flickering, dying light before the flame went out. The toy remained intact, its wooden body cooled to the touch. Desperate, Ethan hid it behind rosebushes in his backyard, digging a hole. He covered it with dirt, adding rocks on top for extra measure. For a fleeting moment, he felt unburdened, the weight on his chest gone. Yet, when he went back into his room, the toy appeared on his pillow. Mud stuck to its suit, and it slumped over, as if questioning his effort to rid him of it. That evening, there were whispers. They were quiet, a soft touching against the windowpane. Ethan curled up, his blanket wrapped tight against his chin, straining. The words were vague, a gentle slithering through shadows. They became distinct, a repeated phrase, "Stay with me." The voice did not sound human. It was too crisp, too hollow, a wind blowing through a pipe with a loose fragment. Ethan's blood hardened. He gripped his pillow, making the voice cease, yet it repeated, even though he wished it wouldn't, "Stay with me." He didn't inform Clara. She was already anxious, her forehead creased watching him pick at his lunch. He told his best friend, Lucas, at school. Lucas was a bigger risk-taker than Ethan, always first to climb a tree or into an abandoned house. They sat beneath a bleacher at recess, and Ethan unloaded it all, the movements of the doll, the whispers, the sensing he had that it knew his every thought. Lucas listened, his eyes widening, and then he grinned. "This place is haunted," he said. "Let's trap it. Lock it up so it can't escape." They came up with a plan. Lucas got an old metal box from his dad's fishing kit, rusty lock intact. They crept into Ethan's garage, the toy held tremulously in Ethan's hands. Its wooden body felt heavier than normal, as if it were fighting. They put it into the box, closing the rusty lock. For double protection, they wrapped it with rope and stashed it behind piles of cardboard boxes. That evening, Ethan slept for the first time in days. The whispers were over, and the house felt less oppressive, as if a storm had passed. However, at midnight he awoke with a different sound, a faint scratching, such as nails scratching metal. It emanated from the garage. His heart racing, he crept downstairs, a trembling flashlight clutched within his hand. The garage door creaked open, and his light landed on the tackle box. It remained there, yet the rope had frayed, and the lock had been bent, as if something had attempted to claw out. Ethan retreated, his breathing shallow. The scratching stopped, and all he heard was the whisper, "Stay with me." Louder now, no longer merely heard by his ears, but echoing deep within his brain. He dashed back into his room, shut the door hard, and burrowed beneath his blankets. The toy remained in the box, he convinced himself. It couldn't emerge. The next morning, the box of tackle was all gone. The lock had been snapped, the rope torn. The toy sat once again on Ethan's desk, its bright red smile bigger than ever. A streak of dirt was on its face, looking like a tear. Ethan glared at it, his gut churning. The toy was no longer watching. The toy was now furious. Ethan did not go to school. He informed Clara that he were unwell, and she let him stay at home, too tired to fight. The house now seemed smaller, with walls that were closing in. The toy permeated everything, not only in what it did, but in the way air thickened, shadows reaching too far around the room. Ethan kept his curtains shut, yet it made matters worse. The toy's black eyes glowed inside his head even when he shut his eyes. He struggled to remain awake, fearing what would happen if he did sleep. But exhaustion eventually got the better of him, and his slumber filled with visions of the voice of the doll. "Remain with me," it murmured, wrapping his thoughts around with tendrils. In his first dream, he saw the doll standing in a great, vacant space, wooden limbs quivering as it danced. The floor was covered with shadows that writhed and crawled, stretching towards him. He awoke, screaming, and his sister Clara came pouring into his room, her face white. "You must rest, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "You're frightening me." He yearned to tell her all about it, yet words were stuck in his throat. The toy could hear him, he was certain. Thus, he merely nodded, allowing her to put him into bed. She left the lamp on, yet it made no difference. The toy sat on his shelf, head turned slightly, looking knowingly. Lucas arrived that afternoon, sliding in by way of the back door. He regarded Ethan's vacant eyes with a scowl. "We must dispose of it once and for all," he said. "Let's move it far, far away." They buried it behind town, deep into a thick stand of trees no one ever went into. Ethan carried it in a backpack, its bulk against his back. The woods were quiet, full of the scent of wet dirt. They made a deep grave with a shovel Lucas had taken from his dad's storage shed, placing the toy there. Its dark eyes looked up at them when they filled it with dirt, and Ethan could swear he heard a soft whisper, "Stay with me." They raced home, gasping for air. For a couple of hours, Ethan felt safe and sound. That evening, however, scratching came back, even louder. It didn't originate from the garage, but from within the walls, scuttling about like an animal caught. Ethan gripped his flashlight, casting a sweep of light over his room. The doll had returned, sitting on his windowsill, wooden hands curled, as if climbing inside. Ethan's scream awoke Clara. She rushed into his bedroom, her face twisted with fear and anger. "What is going on?" she insisted. She spotted the doll and stopped dead. "Where did you acquire that?" "I put it away." "It won't go away," Ethan whispered, tears running down his face. "It just keeps coming back." Clara took hold of the toy, her hands trembling, and strode into the kitchen. She hurled it into the trash, slapping shut the lid. "That's enough," she said. "No more games." But Ethan realized it wasn't a game. The toy wasn't lost. Never would be. That evening, the scratching increased, accompanied by a low, beat-like thud, a heartbeat. It started from the trash, then the walls, then above his bed. Ethan huddled immobile, staring into the shadows. The toy was on the move, looking for him. At dawn, he slipped into the kitchen. The garbage can was knocked over, trash scattered about on the floor. The doll sat in the middle, its bright red smile glinting. Something, however, was amiss. Its wooden chest was cracked, a faint line tracing from its neck down to its waist. Within the crack lurked something, a vein of life beneath skin. Ethan stepped back, his heart thudding. The doll wasn't only alive, now, it was morphing. He rushed into Clara's bedroom, jolting her awake. "We must go," he implored. "It's not a toy. It's something else." Clara's eyes were weighed down with uncertainty, yet then she caught sight of the doll in the kitchen, its cracked chest and thudding core. Her face turned white. She took Ethan's hand, pulling him toward the exit. But by the time they made it into the hallway, lights were flickering, and thuds were increasing. The doll had appeared at the end of the hallway, staring at them with its black eyes. Its wooden body twitched, and it lurched forward. Clara's scream rang out around the house when the toy stepped again, its wooden limbs shifting with a crackle that sounded similar to dried-up bones. Ethan clung tight to her hand, his knees shaking. The hallway appeared stretched out, the walls curving inward toward them as the toy's black eyes drilled into them. Its red grin crooked, and the gap within its chest throbbed with increased speed, sending a soft glow that hurled twisted shadows about the floor. Run, she whispered, pushing Ethan toward the entry. She yanked a broom from the closet, holding it menacingly. The doll tilted back, seemingly entertained, and scuttled forward at an unnatural speed. Ethan struggled with the lock on the door, his palms slippery with sweat. The pounding echoed throughout, rhythmically matching his racing heart. The door burst open, and they staggered into the evening. The street was quiet, the houses of the neighbors dark. Clara dragged Ethan towards the car, but already there, sitting atop it, was the toy. Its cracked chest pulsed with a brighter light, the thumping core now visible, a moving, fleshy mass that appeared to breathe. Ethan's stomach lurched, he gagged. Clara swept the broom, sending the toy tumbling to the floor. It clattered, but its limbs jerked, standing it up. "Stay with me," it said, echoing within Ethan's head. Clara didn't appear to notice, her attention focused on reaching the car. She pushed Ethan into the passenger side and jumped into the driver's seat, her hands trembling as she turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared. They raced down the street, the shape of the toy disappearing into the distance in the rear view. Yet Ethan knew it didn't go away. Its aura stuck with him, a chilling heaviness against his breast. Clara's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, her breathing unsteady. "Where do we go?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't know. The toy had stuck with them everywhere, through the house, through the woods, through the garage. It had no limits by distance or by locks. But he recalled what had been said by the shopkeeper. It likes to be with its owner. Perhaps if they could take it back, and whatever hold it had, it would cease. The antique shop, he instructed. We must return it. Clara nodded, her jaw clenched. She looked toward town's edge, where the shop sat solitary on a worn-out street. The roads were vacant, the evening abnormally quiet. Ethan constantly looked over his shoulders, waiting for a glimpse of the toy scuttling towards them. The thudding had stopped, yet silence proved even more chilling, like before a storm. They arrived at the shop at dawn, windows dark and shut. The sign said, "Close," so Clara knocked on the door with her fists, leaving smudges on the glass. Ethan waited behind her, holding on tight to the backpack into which they had shoved the doll when they had discovered it during a stop for gas, with its red smile shining by the fluorescent lights. They had not seen it get into the car. The door creaked open, and the shopkeeper emerged, her expression no different from before. Her gaze shifted toward the backpack, and her lip curled. "You returned with it," she said, her tone dry. "Not many do." She pushed past her, pulling Ethan into her wake. The shop was cooler than it had been, with an intense smell of rot. The shelves drew nearer, their contents watching. "Get rid of it," she ordered. "It's destroying my son." The shopkeeper's smile grew wider. "It selects him," she said. "Always selects. Can't be destroyed, not if it wants him." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Chose me?" he murmured. "Why?" The shopkeeper made no reply. She merely waved her hand towards a curtained door at the rear of the shop. "There is a place," she said. "A room for it to be bound. But it will not release you so easily." Clara took Ethan's hand, bruising her grip. "Show us," she instructed. The shopkeeper took them behind the curtain, down a narrow, mold-smelling staircase. The walls were intricately carved with the same patterns on the box, curl and writhing. A heavy iron door awaited at the bottom, with a metalwork pattern etched into it that Ethan didn't know. The shopkeeper unlocked it, pushing open a narrow, windowless chamber. In the middle, a pedestal of rock with a dark, patchy stain on its surface. "Put it there," said the shopkeeper. "Call it by its name." "Its name?" Ethan queried, his voice shaking. The shopkeeper's eyes sparkled. "It told you," she said. "Listen." The whisper returned, crisp and distinct, "Stay with me." Below it, something else echoed, a word, large and leaden. Ethan didn't want to speak, but some unnamed consideration made him take out the backpack, and he felt the weight of the toy, a presence clawing at his brain. He unzipped the bag, and he saw the eyes of the toy looking back, its cracked chest thudding softly, a dying star. The room was a tomb, with air so impenetrable that Ethan could hardly catch his breath. The stone pedestal towered over him, stained surface reflecting the faint light of a solitary bulb above. Clara's hand grasped his shoulder, her face white with determination. The shopkeeper hovered by the iron door, twisted fingers on the frame, hungry look glinting within her eyes. The toy sat within his palms, wooden limbs chilled and heavy, cracked chest throbbing with a green, rhythmic glow. "Say its name," the shopkeeper said again, her tone a hiss. "Bind it, or it binds you." Ethan's throat constricted. The name rang there, within the hush which haunted him for days. It wasn't mere words, it was a creeping sound, a syllable with an ash taste. He didn't want to say it, yet the doll's dead eyes fixed him, drawing him into them. The throb within its chest increased, and the room grew smaller, walls closing in. Clara clasped his shoulder. "You can do it," she murmured, even though her voice shook. "I am with you." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. He took a step forward, the weight of the toy pulling his arms back. The whisper filled his head once more, "Stay with me." Below it, however, the voice rose, cold and age-old, "Barneth." It seared his tongue, yet he made himself say it, his voice breaking. "Barneth." The doll trembled, its limbs convulsing with a semblance of pain. The crack on its chest grew wider, the throbbing core blazing with a bright light, sending tendrils of shadows that slithered on the floor. Ethan put it down on the pedestal, his hands trembling so violently he almost let it slip. As soon as it landed on the rock, a convulsion shook the room, a deep rumble vibrating on the floor. The symbols against the walls glowed, patterns spinning at an increased rate, seemingly alive. The shopkeeper started incanting, her voice raspy and guttural, words Ethan could not decipher. The temperature chilled, his exhalations visible in clouds. The red smile on the toy contorted, its black eyes slitting. It struggled, Ethan saw, struggling against restraint. The whisper burst into a scream within his brain, "Stay with me." He gripped his head, his knees folding, but Clara held him firm, her hold intense. "Keep going," she urged, her voice rising above the din. "Don't stop." Ethan willed himself to concentrate, speaking aloud, "Varneth. Varneth." The movements of the toy became slower, weaker, its glow lessening. The shopkeeper's incantation deepened, her voice merging with the patterns on walls. The pedestal shattered, cracks spreading over it like spider webs. The doll's joints loosened, its grin dropping, yet still its eyes glowed, unwavering. And with a crash, a shimmering cloud of dark, stinking mist burst from the toy's chest. Ethan retched, staggering backward, but the mist passed over him. The cloud coiled upwards, being sucked into the wall symbols, which glowed for a brief instant before flickering out. The wooden body of the toy fell apart, leaving only two glossy beads of eyes, which rolled about on the pedestal and clattered onto the floor. The room fell silent. The thudding disappeared, the whispers were stilled. Ethan's chest heaved, his body shaking. Clara hugged him, her arms trembling. The shopkeeper slammed shut the iron door, her face inscrutable. "It's bound," she said. "For now." "For now?" Clara's voice snapped. "What does that even mean?" The shopkeeper's smile reappeared, cold and thin. "Choose him," she said. "Choose him again." Ethan didn't want to listen any further. He took hold of Clara's hand, and he pulled her towards the stairs. The shopkeeper didn't move, however. her laughter trailing far behind them, dry and unending. They bolted past the shelves of abandoned things and into the dawn. The air smelled clean, the street silent, yet Ethan could still sense the eyes of the toy, even as beads, lingering in the shadows. They rode back silently, the car heavy with what they had witnessed. Clara incinerated the backpack, just in case, and they sealed up the house, double-checking all the windows. It wasn't over, Ethan knew. In the evenings, he would hear faint scratches, not on the walls, however, but in his head. The doll had vanished, yet his memory of it hung on, a specter in his brain. Weeks went by, and the scratches healed, yet Ethan never felt secure. He quit collecting knickknacks, fearful of what else would pick him. Clara observed him intensely, her gaze weighed down with shame. The house remained quiet, yet it was a delicate quiet, such as glass about to break. Somewhere, Ethan knew, were those black beads, hidden deep within ash, muttering a name only he heard.